Good evening, and welcome everyone to our service tonight. Let's pause for a word of prayer before we go any further. Father in heaven, we come before you tonight with grateful hearts that we have this opportunity once more to gather together with friends and believers in your house to worship your name. Pray, Lord, tonight that your name may be honored and uplifted, that we can be strengthened, brought closer together, and encouraged in our walk with you. Just pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we'll have 3 songs, and then I will have devotions. Then I believe we'll have another song before we do children's lesson. So,
good evening. In Hymns of the Church, turn to number 6. Number 6. Number 28. Let's all stand.
Divine.
81. Number 81.
It was just a cup of coffee. Maybe I should explain. There's been a recurring theme running around in my head lately, and that is faithfulness in small acts of kindness. And as I posted a picture on our men's chat the other day, if I can remember it, I'm going to have to look. I thought I could quote it. Never get tired of doing little things for others. Sometimes those little things occupy the biggest part of their hearts. And going back to that cup of coffee, I was in a setting once where there was preparations being made for a snack. And it was a point in my life that I was struggling quite deeply. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I was really questioning the goodness of people. And as we were in a group there, just visiting, waiting, one of the men got up and got a cup of coffee and brought it back and gave it to me. And I was floored. It was not in a setting where it was a very normal thing. It was a little bit out of ordinary. But that person had absolutely no way of knowing how that little cup of coffee spoke to me. And it was just God's way of reminding me that people are good. People are still kind. There's still goodness around. And all I said was thank you to him. I let it suffice. I didn't explain the situation to him, and I didn't think it was necessary. But that small act of kindness spoke to me in ways that he had no clue. So my encouragement, and that's the theme that has been going on in my head, is to be faithful in these small acts of kindness, to be faithful in showing the love of God, not in a forced way, but just simply an outflowing of the love that we have within. We don't keep record of it. And I want to invite you to, we're going to read some verses here in Matthew 24. This is a lengthy chapter. I'm not going to read the whole thing. So I'm going to kind of be breaking in here in the middle of one of Jesus' discourses. But I think that's okay. We are going to start reading at verse 31 in Matthew 25. And just prior to this, Jesus was teaching on the giving of the talents and the commendation of the ones who had gained more talents and the denunciation of the one who had hidden his. And then in verse 31, Jesus goes on to say, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say unto them on the right hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was a hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, and you clothed me not. Sick, and in prison, and you visited me not. Then shall they answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not unto one of the least of these, ye did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. And the interesting thing here is someone was keeping track, but it wasn't the righteous. They were doing these things maybe in an unnoticed way. They were doing these things almost just out of, it was just second nature. It wasn't a big thing. It's just what we do. It's not something we make a big note of. I visited the sick today. Check the box. No, that's not what was happening here. It's just a heart of love, just Christ's love flowing out. Really, they didn't even remember. When did we do this? And then the other group, they may actually have done these things. It doesn't really say, but if they did it, they did not do it in a heart of love. If they did it, it was to be seen of men. It was to be recognized as a good person, or that is not what Jesus was looking for. He was looking for these people who do it out of just an overflowing water of life, springing out into everlasting life. That's what's in focus here. And there's many ways this can happen. It can be as simple as giving a person a cup of coffee, or as in the previous chapter 10, verse 42 says, I might just flip back to that and catch that verse, since my memory is not very good tonight. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. And we could get bogged down in the technicality of that, and I'm not going to. But the thought is that the smallest things we do for Christ's sake count. Even a cup of cold water in a dry and thirsty land. The commentaries would bring out that in the setting here, water wasn't as readily available as we have it. So it was maybe more of a little bit more of an event than when we would take it to mean. But the point is, we do the smallest acts of kindness because of the love that is within us. And that is my encouragement to be diligent in the smallest acts of kindness. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be a cup of coffee, it can be a cup of water, even something that small. If you feel a nudge to do something like that, then by all means, do it. Because you'll never know what that small act can mean to the recipient. It can mean something way bigger than you ever thought. So that's my encouragement, to just be diligent in that. That's all I have. I'm going to ask for a song, then the children's lesson. Then I think we're going to have another song after the children's lesson. Then we'll turn the time over to Ray. And if I'm correct, there will be a time of questions afterwards. So just to give you a little bit of preparation with that. So, okay, let's have another song.
In the Hymns of the Church, number 136. $136.
Father, in thy mystery Good evening, boys and girls. Good evening. Tonight I have a story for you, and hope you can learn something from the story. Jerry was feeling very sorry for himself. Father had just asked him to take over the cutting of the front lawn as his share of the task of keeping his home and garden in good order. You run the mower over twice a week and keep it short, Father had said. It won't be a serious burden at all. No serious burden, groaned Jerry as he half sat, half lay on the lawn with his head propped on the grass catcher of the lawnmower. No serious burden? I should say so. Then he began to calculate what this new job would mean to him, for he was good at figures. This lawn, he said to himself, is about 75 feet long and 20 feet wide. Allowing that the mower makes a cut at 1 foot wide, that means I'll have to walk 1,500 feet, 75 multiplied by 20, every time I cut the lawn. Twice a week will make 3,000 feet. Why, that's more than half a mile. At this dreadful thought, Jerry sank down a little lower on the grass, but his mind continued to work out his problem. 3,000 feet a week, he said to himself, is 156,000 feet a year. At 5,280 feet to the mile, that's over 28 miles. This was too much for him. His head slipped off the lawnmower and was turned over on the grass, curled up and went fast asleep in the warm summer sunshine. He was still fast asleep when Father came on the scene and took in the situation at a glance. His new plan did not seem to be working very well. "Hi there," he shouted. Jerry woke with a start and jumped to his feet, a little ashamed of himself. "What does this mean?" asked Father. "No lawn done yet." "No, Jerry," said Jerry. "I started to think about it and found that if I cut this lawn twice a week for a year, I should have to walk over 28 miles. That's too much. So, well, I suppose just fell asleep at the thought of it." "Ha," laughed Father. "Now, what an idea. You mustn't think like that. Everyone were to work out how much effort it would have to put forth in a year on any regular job, he'd never have the courage to start at all. Just think of me. I have to walk a mile to the bus every morning and a mile back at night. That's 12 miles every 6 days a week, or 600 miles a year. If I were to think of that 600 miles, I'd give up now. I'd be too tired to go on. But by just taking a day at a time, well, it doesn't seem so bad. Maybe it helps to keep me in good condition." 600 miles, said Jerry. "I didn't think you walked that far every year, but I do. And let's think of your mother for a moment. She has 5 beds to make every day, which is 35 a week, or 1,820 a year. The very thought of making 1,820 beds is enough to make me feel completely worn out. Besides that, Mother has to wash up at least 150 items a day, including dishes, glasses, knives, forks, and spoons. That makes over 1,000 a week, or 50,000 a year. Imagine that. If you want to feel tired, add to that 250 pieces of laundry to wash each week, or 12,500 a year. Yes, and 150 pounds of food to prepare each week, or 7,500 pounds a year. Why, it's terrifying if you look at it all at once." "I should say it is," said Terry. "Think of washing 50,000 dishes. I'd die. I'm sure I would." "It's obvious, Jerry, that we mustn't look at life that way. It would be too hard on all of us. We must live a day at a time. That is how God intended us to live. As thy days, so shall thy strength be," he said. Not as thy week or as the month, but as thy days. "I think," continued Father, "that we should all learn a good lesson from the pedalium of the old grandfather clock. The story is told that once upon a time, a pedalium started to think. Then it began to add up the number of times it swung to and fro. 1 swing a second, 60 swings a minute, 3,600 an hour, 86,400 a day, 31,536,000 a year. When the pedalium got that far, it probably stopped swinging, and people wondered why the old clock had stopped. Even a pedalium must do 1 swing at a time, and forget the rest. So must we, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day. We must do the best we can. Then life won't seem so hard, and we should have strength for every task we have to do." "Well," said Jerry, "I suppose I have to forget those 28 miles of walking, and just cut the lawn once today." "A mighty fine idea," said Father. "That's the way to look at it." A moment later, a comforting purring noise could be heard in the yard, as Jerry and the mower machine began to move at last, cutting beautiful swaths across the lawn. So let's remember that when you have a big task ahead of you, that you just take it 1 step at a time. You'll get it done. It won't be very overwhelming. Go back to your parents.
Number 155, let's all stand. $155.
Okay. Brother Ray will be sharing with us on the origin and the vision of the Midwest Fellowship. So, Brother Ray.
Good evening. Everybody loves history, right? Good evening. There you go. That's better. I was trying to think, how can I spin this to to make it spiritual. How do you spiritualize history? And I'm not so sure if I was successful, but I did come up with one verse, and there's many references to this same liking in the scripture in Proverbs 22, verses 28 and 29, where the writer says, "Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set." Isn't that spiritual? You know, remove not the ancient landmarks. What does that mean? That means there's things that happen in history that have meaning. And so history is important. And that's the thrust of my topic tonight. And I'm not quite sure. I do know what first statement I made in Sunday school class that got me into this trouble, but I can't remember exactly what initiated the comment. But I made the comment that I think we were studying, and Brandon's not here, but maybe some of you can correct me, but we were studying a king was told to go and get advice, and he went to the wrong source. I forget exactly who that king was, and he went to the wrong source, and he got the advice that he wanted instead of the advice that he should have gotten. And I made the comment in no reflection to our ministry. I said, there's things that have happened that, in the Midwest Fellowship, it's been around long enough that our brethren today don't know the origin or the vision. And it's not their fault. Because we're in the third generation of Midwest Fellowship. A test. Can somebody tell me 3 of the Midwest founding fathers that were there? No, he wasn't there. Not on the initial meeting. Glenn Schrock was there. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Leighton Martin was there. Yeah. Let me double check. A list of, I'm sorry, Homer was there. Yeah, Homer was, that was the second meeting, I'm sorry. He was not at the first meeting, that was the second meeting. But there was about 13 ministers that were in the original group of brethren that had the vision for the Midwest Fellowship. Can somebody tell me what was the vision? What was the purpose of them getting together to be a fellowship?
Bible school was one of them.
That was the primary one. That was the primary drawing together of the Bible schools. There was, at that given point, there was only 3 Bible schools in the conservative realm of the Mennonite Church. It was New Media in Pennsylvania, Calvary in Arkansas, I believe. It's the beach, is it in Arkansas? And then Carbon Hill at Hocking Hills. Those were the 3. And what the brethren were experiencing, their youth were wanting to go, but they couldn't get in. And they were looking to start a Bible school somewhere in the Midwest, geographically in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, in that area. So it would be a closer proximity for their students. My association with the fellowship began in June of 1981. That's 43 years ago. That makes me an old man. And what I share tonight, I pull from Howard Bean's book on the minister's book and also from my memory. And I probably will miss some things, more than likely, in the process. And also, Brother Homer Miller was a fanatic in journaling, and I knew that. And so we were in Indiana here a number of months ago, and I stopped to see Lyle, and I said, is there any chance that I can have your dad's journal? I knew he had them, of his journals of those years. I thought this would be a good place to find some information because I knew he was very much involved. To my disappointment, he was there, but this is what he said. I attended the meetings. No details. And so that was a lost cause. And so anyhow, anyway, tonight, if you don't like history, I'm sorry. But history is important because I believe that history has a way of helping us to understand where we're going. Without understanding history, we are more than likely to lose our sense of direction. History gives us a point of reference. I'm told that a man that is lost in the woods doesn't know where he's at. He will inevitably go in circles. Why? Because he doesn't have a point of reference. He doesn't remember where he was. That's history. And what happens in church history, we forget where we're at and we begin to go in circles. We begin to go in circles. That's why Oliver Hess told me years ago, we were sitting in the teacher's lounge at Maranatha Bible School, and this was back in the 80s. And he said that the Midwest Fellowship will not last 40 years. That's 2 generations. This coming July, it'll be 47 years for the Midwest Fellowship. There's been some ups and downs in the Midwest Fellowship. There's never been a split or a splinter. There have been a church or two. I can only think of one, but there might have been 2. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 that by their demise of closing their doors have left the fellowship. I can only think of one church in those 47 years that was asked to leave the Midwest Fellowship because of some things that were going on in the life of that congregation, and I won't mention names. One thing that we learn from history is that we don't learn, and we continue to reinvent the wheel, and it seems like it goes on for generations. Most businesses, and I'm using this as a platform to say something about the church life. Most businesses begin to struggle in their survival in the 3rd generation. Let me explain. Dad starts the business. He puts a lot of sweat equity into the business. He suffers financial reverses. He lives on basically nothing, but his drive is to establish the business. His son is brought into the business. His son remembers the business is going good now. The son remembers the heartaches, the disappointments, the hardships that dad put in to that business. He remembers that. And so he's very sensitive to that very fact. The grandson is worked into the business. All that he sees is a prosperous business that Dad had going. He didn't have any part of its origin. He doesn't know anything about Grandpa's sleepless nights, visits with the banker to extend his credit because he couldn't make it. He doesn't have any recollection of that. And so he fares sumptuously, and many times a business is lost in the third generation. I make that statement because I think there's some parallels to that in church life. If you watch church life, the second generation understands the hardships that went into the establishment of that organization. You bring in the third generation, they know nothing of that experience. And so they reinvent the wheel, or they let the wheels come off. And that's why you see the cycling of church organizations of that very fact, because they lost the vision. I think it's good that we go back and we reflect on the origin and the purpose. And we remind ourselves, and I say my generation, I just got a new minister's book from CLP, and I looked at the Midwest Fellowship ministerial list, and I saw all the ones that have retired behind them. It's my generation. In the establishing forefathers or the founding fathers of the Midwest Fellowship, they're all gone. There's only one that's still living, and that's Leighton Martin. But he's not a part of the fellowship. So there are no existing founding fathers of the Midwest Fellowship. I say it is my generation's fault of not passing on the vision and the purpose to the next generation. And let that be a warning to the present generation, because if we do not pass that on, it's going to get further and further away from us, and then we don't know where we're at in all of that. I don't know how that got in there, but that's a hot fudge sundae cake recipe. Maybe that's for dessert, I'm not sure. Anyhow, I find it interesting, if I understand it correctly, and I tried to confirm this with Brother Bert today, and he confirmed basically what I thought, but since I'm retired, I don't get involved in some of that stuff anymore. I find it interesting because the moderating committee is the third generation. They're the third generation of the fellowship. They have placed a committee in effect to evaluate what we believe, and I'm not sure all the details on that, and you can correct me, Bert, if you care to, of what the information that I got. They were discussing about the Schleitheim and the Dorkrake and the Garden City Confession of Faith. I got involved in a conversation at the last ministers' meeting that some of the younger ones came to me and wanted to know what I thought. Well, I was out in nowhere. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't understand what they were why they were asking. They said they were trying to come back and understand, what do we as a Midwest Fellowship stand for? I thought it was a good thing, to reevaluate that. Because if we don't, we move so far away from our point of reference that we don't know where we're at. And when we are that far away, it's a long ways back. And so, let me just say a few things. The Midwest is a fellowship and not a conference. And you ask the question, what is the difference? Well, there's a vast difference. And if I understand it correctly, and I'll probably get into that a little later, we'll just hold that. A conference is a group that is governed by one set of rules. And those rules or guidelines are for the entire group. You take there's the Cumberland Valley Conference. There is the Southeastern Conference. Now they don't operate entirely as a conference, but they do in part. They're kind of a mix on that. And then you take, what happens there is that the bishops get together, they make all the decisions of how the church operates. Then they take that to the ministerial body for their support. But the laity have no input into that. Now that's one thing where the Southeastern differ. They do take it to the laity for their approval. That's why I say they're not a true conference. I want to be careful. We were in a southern state, I'll just say that. And it happened to be after they had their conference, and that Sunday morning was not a good morning for us to visit that church. I'll just say that much. They gave the conference report, and I happened to have an Amish couple with us, who is a very spiritual man. And after church, we were on our way home, and I just asked him, I said, "What did you think of the service?" And he was a man of very slow to respond, and he said, that would have been a message or a service that we would have had at council meeting, not on a Sunday morning. I mean, you talk about the do's and the don'ts and the letter of the law. They had it. It's like a good friend of mine told his friend who was of the conference setting. He said, "I like your product, but I don't like the way you get it." But I'm not sure if I agree with that statement. Because if we got a product that we're getting through a means that's not the right method, I'm not sure if we got the right product. If you understand what I'm saying. It appeared to be right. But I'm not quite sure if it was the right product. But anyway. Okay. A fellowship is a group of churches that are loosely joined together. And I use the word loosely because I'm going to talk about the Midwest Fellowship. They are very loosely joined together. And they are loosely joined together, basically on biblical doctrine, which is fine. And they are self-governing. Every congregation is autonomous in its governing, where they have their own set of guidelines and that they fit the situation. In the Midwest, there's quite a variation. Well, I say quite a variation. There's some variation. There's probably more now than there was 20 years ago within the Midwest Fellowship. I'm not sure if that's generating this questionnaire or not. I don't know what is behind all of that. I'm not sure. A fellowship is loosely joined together not to govern each other, but for broader fellowship. It's to reach into different communities for that same support on this, basically on the same level of biblical interpretation. And that's what that draws them together. And it gives the churches a broader spectrum that if they need counsel outside of their church, they can go to. And they can bring in, committees or whatever from like practicing churches that would support and would give them direction in a time of need. And so that's, some basic things that set up the idea of Midwest. Now, let's go to Midwest Fellowship. Like was stated earlier, its goal was, or its initial goal, was to establish a Bible school. And Howard says in his book that if it would not have been for that vision, it's more than likely that Midwest Fellowship would not have developed, because it wasn't necessarily for the fellowship to be brought together as churches. It was more to support the Bible school. Okay. That meeting, the first meeting, was at Fairview, Michigan, which took place in October 1 of 1976. And it was Alvin Troyer and Victor Miller and Roman Slabaugh. And that doesn't mean anything to any of you, probably. Maybe a few of you might have some recollection of but I happen to know them all in that respect. And so they were there, and they just expressed some interest in what they could do to facilitate a Bible school. And the second meeting was in February of 1977, and there was about 50 ministers that were together on that occasion, and they had a ministers' meeting where they had a weekend, or a 3-day session, I should say. It may not have been on a weekend. The topics included attitudes in the church, mission needs in Guatemala, Haiti, and Belize, the role of the minister's wife, and meeting the needs of our youth. Those are some of the topics that were there. And Leighton Martin moderated that meeting along with Samuel Yoder and Roman Slabaugh. And the speakers at that meeting were Eli Yutzi and Marvin Kitchum and Roman Miller from Minnesota. There was some that were there from Iowa. Walter Beachy and Wilford Stutzman also was there at the initial meetings. They never became a part of Midwest Fellowship, although they supported the move and the need of that larger body, even though they did not themselves actually become a part of it. There was a Bible school committee that was put together at that meeting, and they began to search for actually, let's back up a little bit. The Bible School Committee met in Napanee, Indiana. This was another meeting in March of 77. This committee was at that association of congregations to be formed of what conformed on 3 basic principles. And these are the things that tie the Midwest Fellowship together. Number 1, function basically with congregational type of church administration, but who recognize a need for broader sharing. Number 2, appreciate our Christian heritage as brought to us through the Mennonite Church, and are by the grace of God endeavoring to preserve the heritage. And number 3, accept the Christian fundamentals as adopted in 1964 at Hartville, and that would have been the Dorkwright Confession of Faith. Those are the 3 things that hold the Midwest Fellowship together. Very loosely joined together. I've asked the question, what do you need to do to get kicked out of Midwest Fellowship? And I never got an answer for that. Not that I was hankering for that at all, but that's not. But, you know, it's very loosely joined together. And like I said, there was only one congregation that was asked to step out of because the reason for that was that they refused. They had some internal issues, and there was quite lengthy committee involvement there. And the leadership there refused to accept the counsel of the leadership of the committee. And so the fellowship asked them to remove themselves from the fellowship. And consequently, the church is no longer in existence. On September 21 of 1972, there was 23 ministers met at the Bethel Church in Indiana. At this meeting, an association was formed, and they voted strongly for it to be called the Midwest Fellowship. That's when the actual name was given to the Midwest, was on September 21 of 1977. And they decided to appoint a 3-member program committee, and that's when the moderating committee came into effect. Chairman was Homer Miller, Vice Chairman Leon King, and Secretary Alvin Mast. And they adopted a constitutional statement of standards for the Bible school, and they began to facilitate the Bible school. The churches that were charter members of Midwest Fellowship are as follows: Bethel of Napanee, Buck Creek of Richland Center, Wisconsin, Canaan of Madison, Indiana, Gospel Light of Trail, Grace of New Hamburg, Ontario, Hartville of Hartville, Ohio, Heidelberg, which is now Countryside of Ontario, Hillside of Shoals, Indiana, Northwoods of Hayward, Wisconsin, Prairie of Blooming Prairie, Minnesota, Seney of Seney, Michigan, and Sunlight of Maysville, Ohio, and Wilson of Augusta, Wisconsin. The Wilson Church, that's where Alvin Mast and Virgil Schrock would have been. They were only a part of the Midwest Fellowship for a short time, and I cannot give you any information on why or what happened that they withdrew. All right, so much for the establishment of the Midwest Fellowship. Now, there are some ministries of the Midwest Fellowship, the Maranatha Bible School, which was the primary one. It began in the year of 78, I believe. No, the next meeting, 77. September 21 of 1977, at that meeting, they elected the Bible School Board, and they began to evaluate or investigate of where they should have the Bible school. And if I understand it correctly, and I'm not sure where Wheeler, Indiana is, but they had knowledge of a school that was available at Wheeler, Indiana, and I didn't Google that to find out where it is. I really don't know. But they went to see that building, and that building was not adequate. And so that was one that did not survive the acid test in that respect. They considered the Hartville Conservative Mennonite Church as one location. Also the Bethel Mennonite Church in Napanee, Indiana. And then about that time, they became aware of the present building in Lansing, Minnesota, that was vacant. And so they decided that they were going to check that out and see what the possibilities were there. And so they investigated that possibility. And if I understand it correctly, they were able to rent that building for $250 a month. And I remember that building. It was not very warm. It was very cold. And there was no padded seats in that building. The only padded seats in that building would have been, and you students were there, that lounge was not there. That is a blessing. That used to be a straight wall across there, and there was windows that were the length of the height of the whole wall, and it was not insulated glass, and it gets very, very cold in Minnesota, trust me. And they had van seats along that wall, and that was the only padded seats in the building. And they just had these steel folding chairs, and they were cold, and it was just not a very warm environment at all. But anyway, they decided the first year of Maranatha Bible School, they decided to have, that was in February and March of 77. They decided to have 2 3-week terms in that, and they had set the tuition at $45 a session. And they kept that for 2 years. I mean, they didn't raise it the second year. So that's interesting. So tuition's a little bit more than that right now. And they had a total of, the instructors were the first year were Larry Miller, Andrew Kaufman, John Koblentz, Virgil Schrock, Homer Miller, Yuri Sharp, Simon Summers, and Samuel Yoder. A total of 112 students were enrolled, 35 of those which were 6-week students. 15 states and Providence were represented. So having such a very short notice, it was a pretty good turnout for their first year. In their second year is when they went to 12 weeks. They had 4 3-week terms. And they did that for a number of years. And then they finally got to the point where they had students that were returning, but they needed to elevate their level of studies to bring the older students back, or the ones that wanted to go deeper with their studies. So they designated the third term for a different level of study. And that is, generally you can't go to the third term if you have not gone to one of the other terms. I think that's still in effect. It used to be. And so, all right. Just some highlights of the Maranatha, what I want to call it. I won't call it evolution, but there has been quite a change of things there in my 43 years of knowing the place. In 1979, MBS was purchased the little White House, and some of you don't know anything about. I know about the White House. We lived in the White House one year as a family. It was just a little bit more than a shack. That was just about the size of it. But what they did, they needed more dorm space, and so they put 10. If they didn't need it for staff, they put 10 boys out there. And then that worked out pretty good until the state stepped in and said that no, that's not adequate. So they had to shut that down, and they sold that. In the early 80s, there were a total of 98 students in some of the terms. And here again, the state with their regulations of floor space, air exchange, that many bodies in that confined I could never quite figure this out, but in the dorms, they had the one person head to the, I'll say east, and the next one was to the west, to give airspace so they could have enough oxygen to breathe all night. I guess. I don't know. But it just never made a whole lot of sense to me, but that was their regulation. And then they limited the amount of bunks that we could have in the dorms at that point. In 1982, that was the year that I was there as a student, and my wife and our little family was with us. And how well I remember that winter. It was one of the worst winters in my existence. We had wind chill factors of, calculated up to 112 degrees below zero. And it was cold. And that building just boomed and creaked and just cracked all the time. And it was blitzing cold. That was the time that Charlotte and Cheryl, were you with us that time? That we had to get off the interstate because of the roads. We got off to get something else, but they wouldn't let us back on. And so we had to wait till the next morning to get back on because they had closed the highways down. But that was a cold, cold winter. In 1986, the Midwest Fellowship purchased that building. And I think it's 10 or 12 acres. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't have that information, but I think that's correct. For $60,000. But they spent quite a bit more than that on it because they really changed it, and it's much, much better than it was back in 1986, trust me. And it was in 1986 also that the Maranatha board invited Mid-Atlantic and Southeastern to join in supporting because their students were coming to the Bible school. And so they asked for a representative from each of those fellowships to represent them on the board. So currently we have 5 members of the Midwest Fellowship, and then there's one Southeastern, and there's one Mid-Atlantic. And that they represent their constituency for the Bible school. And in what that did, I think prior to that, there was an advisory board that served as advisors to the board, and they eliminated that because it brought in more input from outside the Midwest Fellowship. In 1996, the third and fourth terms, the 3-week terms, were changed into a 1 6-week term. And, of course, the tour that was also added at that point. The tour is optional for students, and the tours have gone internationally. Most times they are in the U.S., but I think maybe every other year I think they try to go international to some degree. In 2007, how well we remember staying in the apartments over there. If any of you have any recollection of the apartments that were about a block and a half away from the Bible school. And that was an awful cold, long walk in the morning. I mean, you couldn't go fast enough. I mean, it was frigid. And that apartment was, I think there was one in the first floor, and there was three apartments in there, and that housed staff. And we stayed in there as a family when I was there as a student. And I don't know that they knew what insulation was as far north as they were. I mean, that building was so cold, it was just unreal. But anyway, that's gone now. I mean, they sold that. They built the duplexes right. And while they had those apartments, there was 2 house trailers that was just right out on the east end of the Bible school, parked in there, and those held staff too. And well, you could close the door, and that's about all you had. I mean, it was pretty poor facilities. But anyway, it worked. But they got rid of those, and they also sold the apartments over on the other side of town. And they built these duplexes, which are very, very nice. And they can staff the houses, they house staff just outside of the Bible school. And it works out very, very well. Howard uses the word decrepit trailers, and he was very kind in that description. Deeper Life Ministries is another outreach of the Midwest Fellowship. On September 10th of 1993, the Sunny Haven Children's Home. Lorene, you were there as a volunteer. You know all about the Sunny Haven Children's Home. It fell into difficulty with the state's regulation, and it just became almost impossible for them to operate. And within the sphere of what they felt they needed to do to take care of handicapped children, it was I think at one time they had like almost 30 children there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was a dream of Al Helmuth and his wife Amanda, because they had a handicapped son, and this was their vision of providing something for, and it was operated through volunteers. And but that fell into disarray, and they thought that they had it sold to somebody else, but I think the state, if I remember correctly, the state canceled would not approve of the sale about the day before they were going to transfer it. And so that fell by the wayside. And so they came to the Midwest Fellowship and wanted to know if we had any interest in those facilities, so that they would just give it to us. And so with John Koblentz's vision of counseling and some of the needs that were shared among the ministerial body at that time, I was very much involved. I happened to be moderator at that time. I tell the folks at Deeper Life that, you got to behave yourself, because my name is on all the legal papers for this building. I said I could take it away I would not do that, but I could. But no, I spent much time down there during that time in the transfer of the facility, and of course that has evolved tremendously since the Sunny Haven Children's Home set up to what it is today. I mean, it's a beautiful facility today in meeting the needs of what they use it for. We were just there for a seminar here this fall, and some of you young people were down there and did some work, and it's really nice. The vision there was to have something that they could help those people that are struggling, and John Koblentz had a keen interest in that, and he became the primary counselor in that. And there was three things that I believe the board came up with that were the basic fundamentals for the establishment of the counseling center, and that is to help Christians who are struggling with spiritual and relational problems, to strengthen families and churches in order to prevent problems from arising. In other words, it was a facility that could be went to be instructed in how can we take care of our problems before we have to send people there. And then the third thing was to equip church leaders so that they can effectively help people who are struggling with spiritual and relational problems. And I think that's really the upshot of what Deeper Life is. More so, their thrust is that helping the hurting, the needs of the hurting. Those seminars are to instruct pastors on how to help people at the home front, that we don't have to put them or send them to the facility there. And we've attended numerous of those meetings and have been a tremendous help to my wife and I, both in understanding ourselves and we understanding other people. So it's twofold. We were there this last fall, and it was well attended. And we were at the one at Fresh Start the year before. And, you know, it's amazing of the cross-section of people that come there. Being a Midwest facility, being under the control of Deeper Life primarily, you had Amish ministers there, you had German Baptists, you had Dunkard Brother, and you had Old Order German Baptist, just a cross section. There was nationwide people there, but you know what? There was no Midwest people there. There wasn't. And I came away from there a little disappointed, you know, that this is a facility that is of our people, and it's not supported by our people, or at least there's no interest in that. And I would just really strongly encourage our brethren to take in those things, because they are very, very important. Anyway, more could be said on that. Then they started a bookstore. They have seminars, marriage seminars, which they do go out to different areas. And they have dealing with anger and bitterness, single ladies seminars, faithful men seminars, faithful women. Those are all seminars that have come out of that organization. Currently, Dave Snyder and Ben Waldron and Tom Johnson are the current personnel there now. Now we move on to the Fresh Start Training Center, which is in Washington, Indiana. That is another organization that was a dream or a burden or something of Abe Knapp's. Abe was a very special friend of mine. Of course, we all know that Abe died in a plane accident, doing what he thought he needed to do, and for some reason the Lord took him home through that means. But Fresh Start was actually born out of the vision of Abe being the chaplain at the prison for 27 years, and he saw that there's a gap between prison life and operating in a normal home setting. There's something needs to be to bridge that. And so he developed this program, and he funded it through mostly through K&K Construction. That was his vision, and that was his mission. And he basically funded everything to get it started. And what happened was, it started out as that same thing as, well, actually, Freedom Hills would have had the same beginning. They had the same purpose. But because of the need among our own people, it shifted from the prison residents to helping our own people. And Fresh Start deals basically, it's for men and couples. And a lot of it has to do with moral issues, dealing with moral issues. And they have gone through some throes there. They've changed some of their programming of how they bring in their residents, and their whole program system has changed. It evolved to where it's a little more efficient than what it had been at one time. But it's a good work. And so they're in the process right now that they have outgrown their facilities. They are right in town. Town is pressing in on them. and they have purchased land outside of Washington, Indiana, and they're going to be building a whole new facility, and hopefully they can sell it's in a industrial park of where they're at right now. All right, more could be said on that, but we're going to move on. And the last, but I guess I don't want to say the least, but it's probably the one that we know the least about, and that is Eagle's Wing Discipleship Ministries in Ontario. I don't know much about that. It didn't last a long time. It's still operating, but it's no longer operating under Midwest Fellowship. It was born out of a need for the folks in Ontario. It was a problem getting the residents from Ontario into the United States to go to Deeper Life or Fresh Start. There was that crossing the border issue. And so they decided that they needed to start a work in Ontario. And so the Midwest churches up there started that. And I'm not sure how long it went, but they had fell on some pretty hard, I don't want to say luck, but they fell on some pretty hard times in the situation that they had there. And eventually, if I'm not mistaken, it is run by the Markham people now and maybe another group, I'm not sure. But it is still functioning, but it's not under Midwest Fellowship any longer. And it was basically the same type of organization as Fresh Start and Deeper Life. So, all right, that was a history lesson. Now, Michael said, I'm going to give time for questions. He did not say there's going to be answers. And I told him that. I said, I'll take questions, but I'm not going to guarantee an answer. So, you have any questions?
I got a couple of questions, but in comparison, Midwest Fellowship, 47 years. How long is the Mid-Atlantic? Do you know how long the Mid-Atlantic has been functioning? Are they longer or less?
It's less. Well, I say less, but I think it might have been about the same time. See, Mid-Atlantic split off of the Eastern Church. It was when Homer Baumberger and, I don't know who some of the others were back then. But it would have been approximately about 1980, 79. I would say approximately about the same time. And the same way with Southeastern. They would have split off the Virginia Conference at that point. And I'm guessing that it would be somewhere in about the same proximity of years in that neighborhood.
The reason I asked that is I was talking to a fellow recently from Mid-Atlantic. And my question to you is the Bible School Hub a good foundation or core to hold a fellowship together? It's worked for 47 years. My conversation with him was, it's proven a Bible school is not enough to hold a fellowship together because you need more of a core values and structure than what a Bible school provides. What do you think about the Bible school being a hub?
Well, I would say this way. It's worked. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, I understand your question. How long will it continue to hold? I think because of our understanding of how a fellowship functions, as long as we can keep that vision that we're not in competition with each other, we're there to support each other. There's variations between Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and Southeastern. There are some variations there. But I guess I can appreciate the fact that it's not a divisive thing. And in some ways, it's complementary, that we can, the differences or the variations are very minor, actually, if you think about it. But it seems like that when you go to more control in a constituency, this seems like you lose that cohesiveness. I don't know if I understand that. it's like a brother told me one time, he said, if you want to operate, get things done, go conference. I mean, you call the shots from the high up and everything happens. It happens quick, but you don't have any friends when you're done. But a fellowship, you take a long time to work it through, and when you're done, you have friends. That's the difference. And so, in answer to that question, I don't know if I have an answer outside of the fact that as long as we can maintain the concept that we're not there, it has its own governing body, and they have a representation there, the Midwest and our Midwest, Southeastern, and Mid-Atlantic. And so if they can work cohesively, and that can work. It becomes an identity in itself, actually. It's about the best answer I can come up with. I could have told you I didn't know, and I really don't know. But
So who did Sunlight and Gospel Light fellowship with before Midwest came about?
they were so unaffiliated, they were independent. No, actually, I'm sorry. I kind of come off the cuff on that. But no, that's right. They were not associated with anybody. William Stutzman, when he started Gospel Light, he came out of Light in the Valley, which would have been Conservative Conference. And in that transition, if I understand it correctly, Bertha, you would know better than me. In that transition, they were just kind of an independent congregation. That's my thinking. And they kind of operated just with whoever, however. But when the fellowship started, that was an eye-opener. That was something that he could attach to. And that's when we became a part of the fellowship.
You mentioned William. He was with Gospel Light.
Mm-hmm.
Now Gospel Light went from Wilmot to Trail. Did he stay at Wilmot?
Oh, Roger. I didn't want to go down that rabbit trail. Yeah, that there's a long history there. Yeah, no, that's fine. It's okay to know that because it's good to understand that. But no, there was difficulties there. When William was bishop there, he ordained Olin bishop. And there was conflict between the two. And it split the church. And that's when Gospel Light went to Trail. Olin and his group moved to Trail. William stayed at Gospel Light. And that was called Mount Joy at that point. And that lasted until 1994. And that's when William came to us. We were packed out. We had 220 in attendance here. And he said, would you be interested in our building? And we said, yes, we would. And that's when we divided Nolan and Joe, and half the congregation went over there. And William stayed there. And I think Alan stayed all with the county line at that point, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have that correct. And then there was others that were, and then, no, there was only about one or two other families there with William. It was a very, very small group. And so, yeah. And then William stayed through the time of Country View there. And then, of course, he was still there when Light of Truth took over from Country View. That was another quick lesson in history.
So Byler went
Here.
from Trail back to here.
No, Byler was here. Nolan and I served together in the ministry here for about
He was ordained in 86, I think.
86, and I went to 94. And Joe was ordained deacon here in 87, and then because of we suggested geographical from 241 and south, or whatever direction that is. There's no south down there. But anyway, they were to go over there, and it wasn't mandatory. There were a few families that went back and forth because of other of their families, and that was fine. And that Joe and Nolan went over there, and I was here alone for about 13 months, 14 months, I forget. And then Maynard was ordained in Glen Koblenz. Yeah. All right.
You mentioned at Bible school in the early 80s where one of them made the observation that the Midwest Fellowship won't survive that past 40 years. What was his basis for making that?
Church history.
Okay.
Yeah, he said this, generally speaking, in the third generation is when there's upheavals, there's difficulties, because the loss of vision, the loss of purpose, that in the second generation bears responsibility in that, because they are responsible to pass that on. We got it from observation. I remember Leighton, Homer, Samuel, Arnie, Eli Yutzi, Ken Brenneman. And just to give you an example, now his name just slipped my mind. Glenn Hurst. You all remember him here, just a young minister from Canada. I talked to him about Ken Brenneman, and he's from Canada. And he said, Ray, I really don't have any recollection of Ken being in the ministry. See, that generation knows nothing of the previous. And that's what I'm saying. Unless us in the middle pass that on, it gets dropped. And so shame on me.
So where do we go from here?
Home. No, I think it's good to go back and revisit. I think this questionnaire that is in process with the Midwest Fellowship, I think it's excellent to revisit our origin. Let's rekindle why are we doing what we're doing? So many times we get in a rut. We do things so long, and for whatever, and we lose why we're doing it. We do it because Grandpa did it, and there's no rhyme or reason. But, we need to go back and visit that, and there is a reason for that. Don't remove the ancient landmarks. All right, it's time to go home. I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Ray. I don't know about the rest of you, but I enjoyed that history lesson. But I also sensed a challenge in that. The mantle, in a sense, is passing to my generation and the younger generation. Now, what are we going to do with it? Somebody made the observation once. Now, this was in a broad sense, in the sense of a Christian. Each Christian stands at the end of a long line of other Christians. Especially when considering Anabaptist history. We are at the end, we are at the point of 500 years of Anabaptist history. The ball is in our court. What are we going to do with it? Will the torch, like the one group sings, will the torch be bright as when it came to me? Are we passing that torch on? That's a challenge. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Are there any announcements or anything? If not, let's stand for a dismissal prayer. Father in heaven, we come before you tonight. Thank you that we had this opportunity once more to hear of your work. We recognize that it is your work. Lord, we pray that we can be faithful in that work, maintaining faith, passing the faith on to the next generation. Just continue to be with us. Help us to be diligent workers in your kingdom. Being a bright light, being a city on a hill to those around us. We know, Lord, we have an enemy, but we know you have overcome him. Just pray that you will help us to be a light on the hill. Dismiss us now with your blessing. Be with us as we travel our various ways. And as we go through the next week, help us to be a light for you to those we meet. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.